$15 gets you the girl. The man who outbid them all would marry her before the year was out. Her name was Onawa. The year was 1887, deep in the Arizona Territory, in a frontier settlement named Redrock Crossing, where the Colorado Plateau broke apart into canyon and scrub, and the wind came down off the mesa with enough grit in it to scour paint off a wagon. She was standing on a platform built from raw pine lumber when the story between them began, wrists bound with rope, and she was not looking at the crowd. She was looking past it. Watch this. All the way through. Hit the like and leave a comment below. It keeps these stories alive. Now let us go back to Redrock Crossing. The platform stood in the center of a lot between the hardware store and the livery, where the packed earth had been smoothed out over years of use, and not a single blade of green had ever managed to come up through it. Whoever had put the lumber together had done it in a hurry. The boards were still damp from the mill, and they shifted under weight in a way that was not quite right, and there were no railings, and the whole structure sat about 4 feet off the ground, high enough that a person standing on it could be seen from clear across the street and from the upper windows of the hotel across the way. That was the point. That was exactly the point of it. Onawa had counted 19 men in the crowd before the auctioneer climbed up beside her, and she stopped counting. 19 was enough to know what kind of morning this was going to be. She had learned in the 3 weeks since the soldiers brought her out of the canyon country and into the jailhouse yard that you could learn a great deal about what was coming from the faces of men who gathered to watch something. A man who looks away when you catch his eye wants something but hasn't decided yet whether to take it. A man who holds your gaze and smiles is the one to watch most carefully. Of the 19, there were 6 who smiled. She filed them away. She had nothing else to do with the time. The auctioneer was a man named Pritch, who wore a black coat too large for him and a string tie that swung loose when he moved. She had seen him twice before in the yard behind the jailhouse, gesturing in her direction with the particular ease of a man discussing property that cannot hear him. He had a way of conducting business about her as though she were not 3 feet away, which she supposed was intentional, and which she had decided to treat as a kind of useful ignorance on his part. Men who don't think you understand them say more than they mean to. Pritch mounted the platform in 2 steps, cleared his throat, and without any particular ceremony began the proceedings. Gentlemen, what we have here is a healthy Apache woman, age approximately 20, taken in the pacification of the Painted Desert Band 3 weeks previous, sound of body. No English spoken, which most of you'll find an advantage. A few men laughed. Onawa heard the laugh and recognized it. She kept her face arranged, the way she had learned to arrange it in difficult moments, attentive and entirely closed. No grief visible, no fear visible. Something behind the eyes that might have been contempt, but was controlled enough to read as simple blankness. Her grandmother had brought her up inside that expression. A face that gives nothing away is a face that loses nothing. Her grandmother had been a specific kind of teacher, the kind who taught by naming things once plainly, and then expected them to be remembered. And she had carried everything the old woman put into her through the cavalry raid and through the 3 weeks of the jailhouse yard and up onto this platform. Bidding opens at $15. $15. She had been thinking about numbers in the 3 weeks. She'd had nothing but numbers to occupy her. The horse belonging to the deputy's assistant was worth $35. She had watched that negotiation through the gap in the jailhouse wall that functioned as her window. $35 for a horse. 15. She absorbed this particular ratio the same way she had absorbed everything else in 3 weeks, filing it against some future use she could not yet name. The bidding began. It went quickly at first. 15 to 20, 20 to 25, and at 25 2 of the smiling men withdrew, and she registered which ones, noting which direction they drifted, and whether they went together or separately. Useful information in case she needed to move through this town later. Then the pace slowed, the way bidding slows when men start doing arithmetic in their heads and weighing it against whatever they think they are actually purchasing. She held herself still on the shifting boards. The crowd smelled of sweat and coal tar, soap and horse, and the sun was breaking through a gap in the cloud cover to the west and hitting the back of her neck, and that was the one warm thing in the moment, and she let herself be inside of only that. The sun on the back of her neck. One warm thing. $40. Who'll go 45? She heard the voice before she located the man it came from. Low, flat carrying without effort. The kind of voice that has spent a long time making itself heard outdoors without raising it. She tracked it to a figure at the back edge of the crowd. Tall. Early 30s maybe, though the desert aged people quickly, and she could not be certain. Canvas work coat, hat with the brim, shaped by use rather than fashion. Dust on his boots from a real ride, rather than a stroll down the main street of a territory town. He was not looking at her the way the others looked at her. He was watching Pritch 45, Pritch announced. Do I hear 50? One of the smiling men, a heavyset man in a vest, whose name she had since learned was Callum Vess, pushed his chin forward. 50. 55. The man in the work coat, no showmanship, no glance sideways to read how the competing bid landed. He put the number out into the lot the way a person puts out a number they have already settled on and are not particularly excited about. Vess pushed to 60. The man in the work coat went to 65 without a pause. Then 80, which drew a murmur from the crowd that she understood to mean this was more than anyone had expected the morning to go. Vess got his jaw set and pushed to 90. $100. Flat and final. Pritch's voice went up half a note. Vess pulled at his vest collar. $100 for what had opened at 15 was not something any of them had anticipated, and by the way Vess's jaw worked, it was at or near the limit of what he had ridden into town prepared to spend. He was doing his arithmetic now, and not enjoying the results. 110. The man in the work coat reached into his coat pocket and kept his hand there for a long moment, while the lot was very quiet and the only sound was the wind coming around the corner of the livery. Then the hand came out of the pocket empty. 125 and I'm done running it up. Done running it up. She turned the phrase quickly. A man who had a ceiling in mind. Or a man who had all of it in his coat pocket and did not want to announce that in public and was letting the number carry the announcement for him. Vess looked at him. The man in the work coat looked at Pritch. Vess looked at his boots. 125. Once, twice. And then there was a moment of actual quiet, which was strange because this was not a quiet town. The wind dropped. Someone's horse shifted weight somewhere in the crowd. A child out at the far edge called out and was quickly shushed by whoever was nearest. Sold to the man in the brown coat. Silas Cade had not planned to spend his month's operating cash on a Tuesday morning. He had come into Redrock Crossing for horseshoe nails, a length of new rope, and a tin of coffee, and he had been walking past the hardware store when Pritch's voice came out of the lot with that first number, and he had stopped walking. He stood with his hardware list in his coat pocket and listened to what Pritch was describing. Sound of body. No English. A healthy Apache woman. He turned and looked at the platform, and what he saw was not what Pritch was describing. He saw a woman standing with her wrists bound on rough pine lumber, with her chin level and her back straight, and her face arranged in a way that made it clear she was running some internal calculation that had nothing to do with the crowd in front of her. Odd. He saw a person dealing with a situation she had not chosen, and doing it with more composure than most people could manage in situations they had chosen freely. He stood there and let the bids go up for 2 full passes, and then he started bidding. He crossed the lot toward the platform when Pritch announced his name, and Pritch's man cut the rope off her wrists and handed him the end of a new length looped around hers, and he had to stop telling himself he hadn't decided yet and deal with what was in front of him. She looked at him directly. Most people standing where she was would look past him or at the ground or at some indeterminate middle distance. She looked at him the way a person looks at someone they are working to get the measure of, and there was no fear in it and no appeal either. Just reading. He held it. He took the rope from Pritch's man's hand. Then he pulled his belt knife and cut through it. The crowd went quiet in a different way than it had gone quiet for the bidding. This quiet had an edge. Pritch's man stepped forward, hand coming up. Silas looked at him. Said nothing at all. The man stopped. He turned to the woman on the platform. My name is Silas Cade. I have a ranch 12 miles east of here on the Mesa Road. You're not my property. I just cut that rope to make the point. He held up the cut rope so she could see both ends of the cut. I'll take you wherever you want to go. If that's east, you can stay at my ranch as long as you need to. If it's somewhere else, I'll put you on the road to it. She didn't answer immediately. She was deciding something, and he had enough experience with people who were making decisions to know the only useful thing to do was give her room to make it. Mesa Road. Her English came out flat and careful, each word placed. Deliberately. I know that road. Then you know where I'm talking about. A pause. She rubbed her wrist where the rope had been, noting the red lines there with the flat attention of a person doing damage inventory. Then her hands went back to her sides. I will go east. They walked out of the lot together, which required more nerve on his part than the bidding had. The crowd had opinions, and not all of them were kept quiet, and Callum Vess, whom they passed near the edge of the lot, put a few words into the air that Silas made a deliberate point of not responding to. Certain men put words in the air specifically to pull a response out of you, and not giving them one is sometimes the harder and more useful choice, even when your body is arguing otherwise. He collected his horse from the hitching rail. They walked out of Redrock Crossing, heading east on the Mesa Road in the early afternoon. He led the horse because he hadn't offered her a ride, and he wasn't sure she'd want one, and she walked half a step to his left and slightly behind him with a watchfulness that was clearly long habit rather than deference. She was reading the terrain on both sides of the road as she went, about a mile out. He nodded toward the horse and left the offer open. She glanced at the animal, and then back at the road. That's your horse, yes? She walked the whole 12 miles without complaint and without much in the way of conversation which suited him. He was not a talkative man by nature, and he hadn't prepared himself for any of the conversations this Tuesday had actually required. About midway along the road, she stopped and indicated a stand of Palo Verde 30 yards from the shoulder. Water below, she put to him. Subsurface. He looked where she was, indicating. There was a seep there with water in it year-round. He had known about it for 4 years and had never had occasion to mention it to anyone. Yes, he confirmed. There's a seep. She filed this as confirmation of something she'd already worked out and walked on. The ranch was a square of flat ground between 2 low ridges on the east side of the Mesa Road, with a main house built of adobe and timber, a barn, 3 outbuildings, and 2 corrals. She looked at it as they came up the track in the last of the afternoon light. He watched her look without trying to read too much into it. He showed her the spare room, second bedroom he'd been using for storage, and hadn't done anything about since the winter before last, and cleared the boxes off the bed and set a blanket on the frame. He didn't make a production of it. There's water in the kitchen. My 2 hands are Decker and Morales. They'll be back from the east pasture before dark. I'll let them know who you are. She was looking at the room, at its single wall and its ceiling that wasn't quite level. What will you let them know about me? That your name is Onawa, and that you're staying until you decide what you want to do next. She turned back from the wall. And what do you let them know about what I am to you? That you're not my property, he said, which is the main thing. She looked at him then the way she'd looked at him from the platform, direct, measuring, working something out about him that she hadn't finished working out yet. He held the look and let her finish it. All right. He left her to settle and went to start the kitchen fire. Decker, who was 41 and had been on the Cade ranch for 3 years, heard the story of the morning with no visible reaction, which was his default response to most things. He ate his supper, passed the salt when she reached toward it, and made no further point of the matter that evening. Morales was younger and more openly curious, and looked at her several times across the table with a look that was not unfriendly, but was definitely doing its own assessment. She ate without comment, and was in bed before any of them. After she'd gone to her room, Decker looked across the table. What did you pay? $125. Decker raised his eyebrows once, dropped them back into place, and let the subject settle. The town had views on it, as Silas had expected. Within 3 days he'd had 2 conversations in Redrock Crossing, once at the hardware store, once outside the post office, where men who were neither quite friends nor quite enemies wanted to know what he intended. He gave the same answer both times, which was that he intended nothing in particular, and walked away, and the conversations ran on behind him in the fashion of all such conversations in small frontier settlements, with not quite enough content to keep them full. On the 4th morning he came home from the east pasture to find Onawa in the barn. She had located the tack room and the neat's foot oil on the shelf, and she had the harness set for the wagon team, laid out on the barn floor in sections, and was working through it with methodical care, oiling the cracked leather back toward something serviceable. She had done about half of it and was doing it correctly. He stood in the barn doorway and watched a moment. You don't have to do that. Her eyes stayed on the leather working oil into a cracked section of collar with 2 fingers. I know. He went to the saddle rack and pulled his own saddle and checked the cinch, which was what he'd come for. And they worked in the same space without speaking. The barn smelled of hay and horse in the oil. After a while, she sat back on her heels. There are men who will come. Not a question. A fact she had catalogued and was putting into the shared inventory. He kept his eyes on the cinched leather. Vess and his people, the one with the vest. And others. I have seen his type before. He does not accept losing what he had already decided was his. He didn't contradict her because she was right. Callum Vess ran cattle on the eastern bench and ran credit at the hardware store, and had 2 men who worked for him who were something more than ranch hands in the usual sense of it. Silas had been aware of Vess for 2 years, without their interests having overlapped directly. This was the kind of problem you could sometimes walk around if you were careful about the angles and the kind. You sometimes could not, regardless. I'm aware of him. She went back to the hames. Then you know it is not finished. A pause, and then she set down the oil rag and looked at him. You spent money you couldn't afford. You cut the rope. You brought me here. I want to know why. He thought about it. He had been thinking about it in the odd moments the work of the ranch left open for 4 days. Because no one else was going to, he said. That is a description of the situation. Not a reason? Yes, he agreed. It is. But it's the closest I've got. She looked at him for another moment. Then she went back to the harness. What came next happened slowly, the way most things worth paying close attention to happen. It was not a single shift. It was a long accumulation of days, each adding something small to the total, and the total building into something that neither of them put a name to for a long while. She did not trust him fully in those early weeks, and she was right not to, and he did not pretend she should. She moved around the ranch with a watchful self-sufficiency that made clear she had decided to stay, but had not decided to become dependent, which he respected and did not crowd. She took on work without being prompted and did it thoroughly. The harness was the start of it. Then 2 bad fence posts in the near corral, then the kitchen garden he had been meaning to replant since spring. She assessed what needed doing and did it, with a thoroughness that made his own thoroughness look approximate in comparison. She knew things about this land that he didn't. Not more things, precisely, different things, as though the two of them had read different books about the same country. He knew water tables and grass production and the seasonal behavior of weather systems rolling down off the plateau. She read where the antelope moved in the first weeks of spring and what the shifts in soil color indicated about subsurface rock formations and which plants growing along the draws carried medicine in their roots. He found himself reading the landscape through both bodies of knowledge simultaneously, and it was richer for the layering in a way he hadn't expected. One morning in mid-October, he found her in the north pasture, crouched over a clay-colored root she dug from the bank of the dry wash. She didn't conceal it when she heard him approach. She held it up. "For Morales," she put to him. "His back, he's been carrying something wrong in his shoulders for weeks. This will help with it." Morales had been complaining about his back since early September, and the liniment from Redrock Crossing hadn't touched it. Silas didn't ask what the root was or what she planned to do with it. "All right," was all he put back. She made the preparation in the kitchen that afternoon, something that smelled medicinal and strange, and it worked on Morales's back inside 2 days. Morales told Decker, and Decker mentioned it to Silas, and nobody made a point of talking about it out loud, but everybody noticed, the kind of noticing that doesn't need words around it and is in some ways more durable because of it. There was an evening in early September when he came back from the south fence well past dark, and she had the kitchen fire going, and food kept warm on the back of the stove, and 2 cups set out on the table. He sat down, she poured coffee, and settled across from him, and they ate in the kind of quiet that had gradually, over the weeks, become a different thing from silence. It was not the same as talking, but it had texture to it. After a while, he put a question into it. "Where were you going?" "Before the soldiers." She was quiet for a moment, deciding how much of it to put into words. Then, "North. My brother Tohono was moving north with the band toward the river country. I was separated from the group in the confusion near the Painted Desert. A cavalry patrol came through the canyon faster than anyone had expected." Her hands stayed wrapped around her cup. "I have not been able to find word of him since. He thought about what was useful here versus what was merely sympathetic. There are Navajo traders who come through on the Mesa Road every October. They know the canyon country north of here. If your brother went north, someone on that route would have information." She looked at him for a long moment, deciding whether to believe something, not because it was unlikely, but because belief costs something, and she was careful with what she spent. "You would put that question to them?" "Yes." The fire settled in the hearth. Outside, the night was very still, in the particular way of the Arizona Mesa in September, when the monsoon has fully passed, and not a breath of anything moves through the dark. "He is 16, she said. "He is careful. He would not have been taken. I think you're probably right. I think so, too." The way the words came out told him she had been putting them to herself for 3 weeks and needed one other person to confirm them out loud, so they would stop being only her own voice. The Navajo traders came through in mid-October, a father and 2 sons with 6 horses and a load of blankets. They camped at the ranch for 2 nights. On the second evening, Silas sat with the older man by the fire outside the barn and put the question about the Painted Desert band to him. The older man was quiet for a while. He had heard that a group had made it to the river country ahead of the cavalry, a family group, maybe 3 or 4 people, he wasn't certain, camped near the canyon rim north of the confluence. He had come to this information through 2 intermediaries, and he was the kind of man who was precise about the distance between what he knew and what he had been given second-hand. Silas repeated this to Onawa exactly as he had received it, including the chain of intermediaries. She listened, without moving. When he finished, she held it for a long moment. "It's possible. That's enough. It is possible." That night he woke to something he couldn't immediately locate, and lay in the dark of his room listening. The night sounds were normal. What had woken him was a different kind of absence, the subtle shift in the weight of the house that means someone has gone outside. he got up and looked out the bedroom window. She was on the top rail of the near corral, in the dark, very still, facing north. He looked at her for a moment. Then he went back to bed. Some things are not yours to step into. By November, the town of Redrock Crossing had divided into two camps about the situation at the Cade Ranch, as small frontier towns do when a person does something they can't quite categorize. The majority position was a kind of irritated bafflement that defaulted to mild disapproval because it required less effort than actually thinking through what had happened. The minority position was more complicated and tended to stay out of the conversations at the post office and the hardware store. The postmaster's wife, Genevieve Abel, who read everything that moved through her husband's window, passed along to Ellen Harker, who ran the seamstress shop on the east side of the main street, that she had observed the Apache woman in the hardware store buying lamp oil and paying for it herself with coins she had apparently earned, helping the Cade Ranch get its harness in order, and that she had been composed and direct about the transaction, and that a person could have whatever opinion they wanted about the whole arrangement on the Mesa Road. But there was a dignity to this woman that not everyone in Redrock Crossing, including people who had been there a very long time, could honestly match. Gallum Vess thought about none of this. Vess thought about the $110 he had been prepared to spend and the rancher from the Mesa Road who had outbid him in public and walked the woman out of the lot beside him without ceremony, and the more Vess turned it over across those weeks, the more it settled in his chest in a way that had less to do with money than with something else he didn't have a clean name for. He rode out to the Cade Ranch on a Thursday in November, with Polk and a younger man whose name Silas had never caught, but who had a way of keeping his hands near his belt that Silas had registered. They came up the track in the mid-morning when Decker was in the east pasture, and Morales had gone to town for supplies. Silas met them in the yard. Vess pulled up and looked around the place with the air of a man taking inventory. "Vess, I'll say this plain because I think you're a plain man. I want the woman. She's not mine to give. You bought her, and I cut the rope." Silas put back. "She's here because she chose to be. That's the start and the end of it." Vess put on a smile that had nothing warm in it. $125 buys a woman in this territory. I'd say there's a legal question worth putting to somebody. There isn't one. The law in this territory on that particular question changed 14 years ago. If you've got a legal complaint, ride into Redrock Crossing and put it to the circuit judge. He'll give you the same answer I just did. Vess looked at him with the flat patience of a man who has decided not to be argued with. Polk was watching the barn. The younger man was watching the house. "You've made yourself a particular kind of problem," Vess put out. "I've repaired my fence line and bought horseshoe nails. You're the one who rode 12 miles to put words into the air that could have stayed unsaid. What happened next was quick." Vess was turning his horse, and Silas had begun to ease the tension in his shoulders, and from the kitchen doorway came a sound he identified exactly half a second before his mind caught up to it. The clean, deliberate working of a lever rifle action. Then, Onawa was in the doorframe with his Winchester leveled, the muzzle aimed at the center of the yard with the settled authority of a person who has held this angle before. She had not mentioned knowing how to handle it. He had not thought to ask. The question is answered. She put to the three men in the yard. Her voice carried the same flat, deliberate quality she used for everything. No elevation, no performance. "You can go now." Polk's horse shied sideways. The younger man moved his hand toward his belt, registered what was in front of him, and moved it back. Vess looked at her. His face went through several calculations in rapid succession before landing on something between anger and recalibration. A man rereading a situation he walked into underprepared. "You'd be making yourself a very specific kind of problem," he put to her. "I already have a specific kind of problem," she returned evenly. "3 of them. On horses. In my yard. My yard." Vess looked at Silas, who had nothing to add, because the situation had resolved itself, and his job now was to not interfere with the resolution. He was also, internally, conducting a rapid conversation with himself about the fact that the resolution had arrived without him, and discovering that he didn't yet know how he felt about that, which was a question he would think through at some length over the following days. Vess left. Polk went with him. The younger man went last, with the particular deliberateness of a person extracting himself from a space where the balance has shifted and wanting his back to something solid before anything else moved. When the sound of their horses faded out on the mesa road, Onawa lowered the rifle. She cleared the chambered round with careful attention, the way a person handles something they respect, and leaned it against the doorframe. Silas looked at her. "Where did you learn?" "My father's Winchester." She picked it up by the barrel and held it out to him. "Since I was 9 years old, I have been handling one longer than you have been on this ranch." He took it. He looked at her and she looked at him, and there was something in the quality of the moment that was different from every moment before it. He could not have said exactly how. Same yard, same Thursday, same two people. But something had been shown and received, and the terms between them had shifted in a way neither of them would need to state. "I was going to handle that," he put to her. "Yes." A pause. "But 3 of them, and Morales was in town. So you covered it." "So I covered it." He thought about this for a moment. "Thank you." One nod. She went back into the kitchen and the coffee pot went back onto the stove. The winter came down on the Mesa Road in late November and stayed. The corrals froze solid through December and into January. The work of the ranch contracted to the essential: feed, water, fence, shelter, 7 days, week into week, the specific rhythm of a working place in a hard season. She stayed through all of it. He never put any pressure on that. She never made a point of the decision either way. She was there, and that was the fact of it, and the fact settled into the structure of the place, the way a load-bearing post settles into good foundation, something you stop noticing, except when you think about what the structure would be without it. She was a specific kind of capable, the way people become capable when they learn something in genuinely hard circumstances. She read weather off the color of the mesa before he could feel any change in the air. She knew which draws to avoid in the cold snaps that came down from the north in January. She found a weak section in the west fence line that Decker and Morales had walked past a dozen times without spotting, and she fixed it herself from materials she found in the barn, rather than wait for the supply run. There was a morning in December when a cold snap came through that frosted the water troughs overnight, and he was out at first light breaking the ice, and he noticed the young sorrel mare, standing with her off foreleg, slightly loaded, not quite right. He had been watching her for 2 days without being able to say exactly what he was seeing. She ate, she drank, she moved around the corral, but something was off, in a way he couldn't name. He walked back to the house, and Onawa was already in the kitchen with coffee going, and he didn't put a question to her directly, just mentioned what he'd noticed: the loaded leg and the way the mare was standing. She came out with him without putting on her coat. First she ran her hands down the mare's leg from the knee to the coronet, slowly, feeling for heat and swelling that weren't visible yet. Then she felt around the bottom of the foot where it met the shoe. She went to the barn and came back with a hoof pick and worked out a stone chip that had wedged itself under the front edge of the shoe and worked its way in over several days. The chip was small enough that he would have looked for it and not found it. She showed it to him in her palm. He looked at it for a moment, and then he went and got the rasping kit, and they reseated the shoe together in the cold of the corral, and the mare was fine by afternoon. He didn't put words to what that morning had been, but he thought about it later, alone in the near barn in the last of the afternoon light. It was not the knowledge itself that stayed with him. He had been around horses his whole working life, and there was always more to learn. It was the specific combination of things: that she had come out without her coat, that she had run her hands down the leg with the ease of a person who has done this a long time, that she had found in 30 seconds what he had been looking at for 2 days without seeing. There was a particular quality to knowledge that lives in the hands rather than the head. He knew what that felt like from the inside. He had never before this winter watched it from the outside in someone else. What she could not fix was the absence of news from the north. She did not put much into words about it, but it was present in her in the evenings, something you could feel in the way she sometimes looked north through the kitchen window before she went to bed, patient about it as a person becomes patient about something they can do nothing to hurry, but not finished with the waiting. She found the road to her brother in January. A Zuni man named Anselmo came through on the Mesa Road in the 3rd week of the month, heading south from the canyon country with a load of turquoise. He had been at the river camp in December. He knew the name Tohono. He put it plainly. The family group was there, 40 people of the Painted Desert Band, healthy, with food enough for the winter, camped above the canyon on the east side. They would likely move in the spring when the grass returned, probably southeast toward the old range. Onawa heard this in the kitchen, standing with her back to the wall, while Silas and Anselmo sat at the table, and her face during the telling was absolutely still in the way it went, still when she was holding something large. She put 2 questions to Anselmo, one about the location of the camp, one about the name of the elder leading the band, and he gave her both answers, and she put her thanks to him plainly. After Anselmo had gone to the barn for the night, she stayed at the kitchen table with both hands around a cup that had gone cold. Silas remained in the room without making a purpose of it, reviewing the harness inventory, which could have waited until morning. After a while she looked up. He is there. A pause. He is well. Yes, he will move southeast in the spring. She was quiet a moment. I can reach him? Yes, he agreed. You can. A long silence opened up. The fire was burning low, and he got up and put another piece of juniper on, and it caught well, and he stood with his back to the room, and after a while she broke it. You are quiet about it. He turned around. She was still at the table, both hands around the cold cup, watching him with the direct look that had stopped being difficult to receive somewhere around the middle of October. He was honest with her. I don't want you to go. That is the quiet. It's not an instruction. You go when you want, and where you want, and your brother is alive, and you should go to him. I'm just telling you what the quiet is. She held his look for a while. The juniper was burning well, and the room was the warmest it had been all week. Outside, the wind was doing what it did on the Mesa Road in January, a long, cold friction sound against the corners of the house. I do not want to go. She put back both hands still around the cup. Her voice, as level as always, but with something different in the level, not less controlled, but more visible, as though the surface had dropped, and you could see further into what was underneath it. I want to see my brother. Both things are true. They do not work against each other. He sat back down across from her. Then what do you want to do? She thought for a long time. He did not push into the thinking. I want to go north in the spring, she put to him at last. I want to see Tohono, and know he is well with my own eyes, and tell him what happened and what I chose. And then I want to come back here. He looked at her. Here. He was quiet a moment. I can't go into the canyon country with you. I don't know it, and I wouldn't be welcome. No, you would not, so you'd go alone. Yes. There was the faintest shift at the corner of her mouth, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. I have gone alone in harder country than the canyon road in spring. I am not asking your permission. I am letting you know what I want, which is a different thing. I know, he said. I'm saying it out loud to hear myself get used to it. Something shifted in her face. Not a full smile. She didn't often let those out all the way, but something around the eyes that changed the quality of the room by a degree. You are not good at putting what you mean into words. No, he agreed. I'm not. You are getting better at it. He thought about this. Slowly, she put her cup down on the table, put the rest of it into words. He looked at her. She looked at him. He had spent 4 months learning to read her, and what he had learned was that there is always more to read, and that she was patient with people who were slow, but not patient with people who were dishonest about being slow, and that she knew the difference between those two things precisely. I want you to come back, he said, and when you do, I want to know what it is that you want for your own future. Not what I want. What you want. He stopped. That's the honest version of everything. I haven't put into words yet. She held his look for a time that was long enough to mean something. Then, what you are asking is whether there is room for you in it, in my future, in what I choose. Yes, there is room, she put to him. There has been room for a while now. I did not put it into words because I needed to know what you would put into words first, in your own way. And now you know, and now I know. She got up and poured his coffee, fresh, and set it in front of him, and poured her own and sat back down, and they stayed at the table until the fire burned all the way out and the room went cold around them, and neither of them moved to rebuild it. The spring came late to the Mesa Road, as it does most years, dragging its feet up from the south and not fully arriving until the second week of April. She left on the 14th, which was a Monday, on the bay horse with 2 weeks of provisions and a saddlebag she had assembled over the winter with the quiet thoroughness of someone who had been planning a journey in their head for months. He walked with her to the road. At the road she turned in the saddle and looked at him. Silas, he looked up at her. When I come back, she put to him, I will need you to meet my brother. He hadn't expected this in quite these terms. He thought through what it meant. Will he come here? He will come part way. You will go part way. You will meet where it is possible to meet. All right, he said. She turned the bay north onto the Mesa Road. He watched until the bend in the road took her from view, and then he stood there a while longer because there was nothing with any particular urgency pulling him back to the yard. She was gone for 7 weeks. He fixed the south fence, reframed the near barn's north wall, started the kitchen garden late and got it going, and made a point of not counting the days in a way that felt undignified. Decker said nothing about any of it, which Silas was grateful for in a way he could not have properly articulated. She came back on a Thursday in early June, which was a day he happened to be working a young horse in the near corral, when he heard a horse on the Mesa Road and looked up and recognized the bay's particular walking rhythm before the horse even came into view. He put the young horse on the tie rail and opened the corral gate and came out to the yard. She dismounted in the yard with the look of a person who has made a trip they planned carefully and executed well, and who has come home. He took the bay's bridle without her needing to offer it. Tohono as well, she put to him immediately. The band is on the east side of the canyon, 40 people. They have what they need for the summer. She pulled the saddlebag down from behind the cantle. He sends something for you. He looked at her. Send something, a message. She set the saddlebag on the fence rail and turned to face him. He says any man who spent his last money to cut the rope and then handed her back to herself, that man can come and meet me in the canyon country in August. He says bring good tobacco. Silas stood with the bay's bridle in one hand. He was aware of the weight and what had just been put across the fence rail and what it had cost to carry it and what it would mean to receive it in the right way. Good tobacco, he said. Yes. He looked at her. What else? She kept her eyes on him. He asks what your intentions are. I told him I would put the question to you directly, with me present, so you could answer in your own words. The afternoon was the kind of blue June afternoon the Mesa Road saved up all winter and spring, and produced all at once, the air carrying creosote and sage after the previous night's brief rain, the light very clear, standing everywhere at once without going anywhere in particular. Silas said, my intentions are to ride into the canyon country in August with good tobacco and meet your brother, and to put to him what a man is supposed to do when he wants to marry his sister, and then to do exactly what he says is the right way to do it. She held his look. "That is what he expected you to put into words," she let him know. "He told me to pass this along. A man who already did the hardest part before anyone asked him to, knows how to do the rest." He put out his hand. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put her hand in it, which was not the whole of it, but was the beginning of the whole of it, and they both knew that was what it was. They were married in August, twice. Once at the canyon rim north of the confluence, where Tohono and 3 elders from the band conducted a ceremony over 2 days that Silas attended with careful attention and without understanding most of the words. He had ridden north into the canyon country for the first time in his life, and the country had done to him what it does to people who arrive in it without having grown up inside it. It made everything he knew about scale feel wrong. The canyon walls ran 800 feet, and the morning light came down into them slowly, working from the rim down through bands of orange and red sandstone, and the wind in the canyon had a voice in it that was not quite sound and not quite silence. He sat at the edge of the fire on the first night, and Tohono sat across from him, and they did not share a common language and did not try to produce one, and the fire was between them. And Tohono watched him with a look that Silas recognized. It was the same look his sister gave people. And Silas held it without performing anything, and after a while Tohono put another piece of wood on the fire, and that was apparently the end of that particular assessment. The ceremony on the second day was long and specific, and involved things he would only partly understand later, when Onawa described them to him in pieces over the following year. What he understood at the time was fire, water, 4 directions, the names of the elders, a cord of sinew that Tohono tied around both their wrists for the duration of the main rite, and the sound of singing that he had never heard anything like in his life, and that he would not be able to describe adequately to anyone who asked. Though several people did ask, he stood where he was put and did what he was gestured to do with as much attention as he could bring to it. And if he did any of it wrong, no one indicated so, which he took as adequate. And once in Redrock Crossing, at the county courthouse, which took 11 minutes and was conducted by a judge who had known Silas for 5 years and who looked at Onawa when the proceedings ended and put plainly, "Welcome to the territory." She received this without any particular expression and thanked him without ceremony. Callum Vess had moved north and put his bench land up for sale by then. Nobody in Redrock Crossing raised this fact with Silas directly, and he didn't raise it with anyone. Some problems resolve themselves if you give them enough room and enough time, and some don't, and knowing which kind you're dealing with before you decide how much energy to put into it, that is one of the things that takes years to learn in country, like the Arizona Territory, and cannot be hurried from the outside. Decker and Morales stayed on through the following winter, and the one after that. The ranch expanded by a quarter section in 1889. Tohono came south twice in the first year after the wedding, and more regularly after that. The visits went both ways. Silas riding north into canyon country, he was learning slowly and carefully. Onawa's people coming south to the Mesa Road in the old grass season. The relationship between those two worlds became, over years, a specific and deliberate thing with its own protocols and its own vocabulary and eventually its own ease, which is the best thing any relationship between different worlds can become. What she put into words years later, when Ellen Harker finally got up the nerve to put the question directly to her about the platform, the rope, the $125 was this: "He didn't pay for me. He paid to make a point." Those are different things, and because the point was true, I believed it. Ellen Harker looked out the window of the seamstress shop at the main street of Redrock Crossing. "Well," she put back, "that is one way to begin a thing." "Yes," Onawa agreed, and smoothed the fabric in her hands. "It is." She didn't add anything to that. The beginning, as it had turned out, had been exactly enough,